SMTN.
How's it going, everybody, and welcome to Shin Megami Tensei Network Link 191. I am your host, Spencer Presley, and joining me on this very audiophile-tastic episode is Keith. Now, Keith, I've made two major mistakes before jumping into this podcast. Number one, how do I pronounce your last name without offending you?
It's Arem, A-R-E-M, Arem.
So Keith Arem, who are you and what do you do at PCB?
So I'm the president of PCB Productions here in Los Angeles, and we do performance capture and a lot of creative services for the game and film and animation industry. And we do it all here in LA during the pandemic.
So I'm going to tell you what my fiance told me when I told you that when I told her I was going to be interviewing you, and she said, "What blackmail do you have against this man? How did you get someone in this position to interview you, like to have an interview on your show?" And I said, "I don't know," because I'm going to be very honest with you. While emailing you back and forth through the past couple of days, I've been like, so you're just going to like hand me off to somebody else, right? I'm not actually going to talk to you."
Well, it's very interesting. Our whole company is working remotely now. So our engineers are working remotely. Our staff is working off-site. We're working with all the actors off-site. So, so when we're here, Valerie and myself are running the ship. And it gets crazy from time to time. But we're always open to, communicating with the fans and the audience and making sure that people are aware of what we're doing here. And we're really trying to help the community, especially for the acting community right now, and trying to bring everyone together because it's been such a trying time during the whole outbreak of COVID. So, so anything we can do, we'd love to be part of it.
Oh, I appreciate it, because it's funny, this is actually the second time that's happened of me just interviewing, like basically cold calling a company with an email or something, and just somehow getting like the CEO on here, be like, wow, that was way easier than it probably should have been to talk to somebody. but it's so funny, because like I get questions a lot of like, oh, how did you get like X or Y voice actor on? And 99% of the time it is I just genuinely will ask them if they have any free time or whatever they can give. That's what I can kind of give. And people, you'd be so surprised. Because I don't know why the kind of like stigma is out there of like, oh, if I want to have like a good example, like I had Valerie on our podcast probably like 3 or 4 years ago now, which seems like 9 million years ago. But it was so funny. I just met her in person. I was like, hey, whatever time you could give or whatever, and she like could not have been like more sweet about it. Like talking to her was such a blast.
When you get started in this industry, you're just hoping to meet and talk to anybody who'll listen and take a meeting with you. So when I first got started in the industry, I started in the music industry, and I just started researching, all the record companies I wanted to get signed to, and none of the record companies would sign you unless you had a manager, and you couldn't get a manager unless you had a record deal. So you were kind of stuck in this kind of endless loop. And I ended up connecting with this really high-profile manager who had represented a lot of big bands that I remember as a kid growing up with. And I reached out to him, and for whatever reason, he answered the call. And my first call with him was like 2 or 3 hours. And he ended up becoming a mentor and an advisor for me. And then when I did get my first record deal with Capitol, he helped me negotiate the record deal and helped get me out of some other bad deals. And so it was really interesting, just the kind of friendships you make in the industry just by, meeting people. And if they're open to it and you just, connect with the right people, it's a small industry, and that's what's really nice. And I think everybody really is open to helping each other out. So everyone, I think, you want to pay that forward, and everyone definitely appreciates that when that happens to them.
That's always awesome. I guess kind of going off of that though. So for you in like the history with PCB, like how did like we get to this point as we are now, at least in terms of the very, very beginning? Like what are the sort of like stepping stones that kind of got you here?
I'm kind of an awkward person in the sense that like I have a technical background, but I'm a creative person. So I started in the music industry as a composer with Biohazard and Contagion, writing, angry industrial music. But I was interested in scoring movies and working in video games. But I also had an art background and a writing background and also an engineering background. So I moved out here from Arizona when I was a kid, when I was about 17, to get my first record deal. I went to school here and got my first record deal as a freshman. And my parents freaked out because they thought I was joking and they didn't want me to drop out of school. So I stayed the course and I stayed in school. But I finally did sign my first record deal with Capitol when I was a senior. And I got into doing, albums and touring. And but the fun thing was the whole time we're on tour, going from city to city, we're at the back of the tour bus playing, Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter or whatever game we could get our hands on. And when I got back from tour, I got approached by a friend who was working for this company, Sony, that was doing this small game system called the PlayStation. And he asked me if I'd get involved in production. And I started scoring early games. I did Earthworm Jim and BattleTech, which became MechWarrior, and some of the Disney titles. And I got hired by a company called Virgin Interactive. And that was it. Once I got into the game industry, I was hooked. And so for the past 20 plus years, I've been working in games, and I evolved from doing music into doing sound effects. After Virgin, that I was working for, was acquired by Electronic Arts, I became both the audio director for Virgin and for Electronic Arts, and I ran their studios for 7 years. And then in '99, I left and started PCB Productions, and so it's been this whirlwind ever since. And since then, I think it's been 650 games and everything from all the Tony Hawk games and 11 of the Call of Duty games and Ridge Racer and Titanfall and all these other fun games. So it was just kind of a creative expression, I think, of where I was going with music. And I was able to evolve that into directing and recording with actors in other places. And that started also my love of creating things as well. So I started creating comic books and animated shows and motion pictures. And so now my company is split between production services in the game industry and original titles that we're creating here at PCB. So it's kind of in a nutshell. It's kind of
that's awesome. Actually, I have to ask, just because I'm such a big soundtrack nerd, especially for video games and stuff. Considering your history with some of the earlier titles you worked for, do you look at the kind of renaissance, especially things like vinyl is in now, where you see people being like, hey, this game soundtrack from 20, 30 years ago? Let's put this on a vinyl now, and 500 people will buy it. Do you have that moment of oh, dude? Well, I guess no, yeah, because you worked on Earthworm Jim, so you've seen that with at least some stuff for it. But is that kind of been weird for you? Because I feel like even 5 years ago, me walking into a record store and seeing video game soundtracks would just be out of the Twilight Zone for me.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times those early scores that I did on the Sega Genesis were very much created for those systems. So I've seen people go off and orchestrate my music and do big orchestras with stuff from all those early games, and it's fantastic and it's great. But it's a different medium. When you're creating for 6 notes at a time, it's a lot different than when you're creating for 1,000 notes at a time with an orchestra. So I love the idea that a lot of these this old music is coming back around. And there's a game I did years ago called Metal Arms, and they're trying to get a reboot of that. And another game, Toonstruck, that I worked on, that we've been trying to get a reboot on. And I go back and listen to the soundtracks and the early work that we did on these things, and they're phenomenal. It's not bragging. It's just that it was a really fun project and a lot of stuff that we put a lot of love into, and they still, I think, hold up now. So it's great to see the audience rediscovering things that were from 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago and coming around as new. And so that's nice. It's kind of fun for people to rediscover something that you really put a lot of love into.
Yeah, you've now put me in this position of I could interview you just as long for all of your stuff for PCB as well as your time working in music and stuff. So now it's just going to be in the back of my head, all these questions me, not host person, wants to know, and then the other reasons why you're here for. But I guess kind of focusing more on the PCB side of things, in those early years of when you guys were setting up the company, I'm trying to think, because I know you guys wouldn't have been the only ones, but are we even talking maybe 10 at max other kind of companies of that sort of nature of like, okay, for doing voice acting and recording and stuff like that?
Yeah, there wasn't very many people doing this when I got started. So as a result, a lot of the technology and processes and pipelines that you see in the game industry now actually originated most of that back in the 90s. All the on-screen formats that we have, the Excel script templates that we use, a lot of the technology we use now for vocap and facial cap, that's a lot of stuff that I just created out of necessity because there was just a handful of us. There's only 3 or 4 major publishers that were doing games back then and about 200 developers. So it was a very small industry. And even though everyone would work on a handful of games, there wasn't more than a few hundred games per year. So now that you've got mobile and AR and VR and all these new media types of experimental technologies coming out, and we're creating stuff for location-based entertainment and theme parks and other things, the industry has grown a lot. But that core base of people who had really started the industry are still actively working in it. There's a joke that we have that you never leave the game industry, you just change booths at E3, and
that is so true with how incestuous everything is. Like even from like the media side, like how I've been in, like the amount of times of like, oh yeah, Jeff, yeah, he went from here, now he's just in PR over here, or he's gonna go from PR to like producer roles and stuff like that. So it's right. It's just so funny of like, yeah, unless somebody basically like dies or just has like a near-death accident where their life just totally changes, they're like, no, if you're in this industry, you got to try really hard to get out of this industry.
Yeah, it's tough because when you have a skill set and a passion for it, it's hard to just say, well, hey, I'm going to get out of this and go into finance or go into some other area. It's definitely a very creatively passionate industry, and you see that for everybody. I mean, artists and musicians and actors and programmers and designers, everybody really loves what they do, and they try to find other ways to apply that. And that's why I think a lot of us are getting pulled into new directions right now for smart city technologies and these location-based rides and activations, because people want that interactivity, but they might not be at home, or well, right now they might be.
I was going to be like, how depressing is it, like, if your life is to work on like, oh, I'm designing theme park stuff for 2021, or like I'm working on like AR-based technologies for like outdoor experiences, and you're like, oh, when can I try this? And you're like, oh man, I don't know. I'm just hoping this is going to be done next year, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've had a lot of projects I've been working on that were set up to roll out in airports and theme parks and other places around the world, and a lot of those have been put on hold. We had stuff for the Olympics and a lot of things that really got squashed. But a lot of these guys are now coming back out and planning for post-COVID. So it's kind of interesting time. There's a lot of us that are in the game industry who are working on these other fields as well, where just investing in technology and things that'll happen after the pandemic kind of resolves.
So for at least from your side of it, earlier this year when the pandemic was kind of starting up, like in that March-ish period, when people were slowly kind of getting into lockdown, was there like that oh crap moment of like we totally got to transition everybody? Had there ever been kind of a contingency in the plan of like, okay, if we had to work from home, how's this going to work? Like, so like how did that kind of rollout work for you guys? Because I know it almost feels like it's kind of amazing how some companies just sort of rolled with the punches like super smoothly, and then other ones even like 8 months into this thing are still like barely recovering.
Yeah, it's I mean, for us, we saw things starting to happen in January and February. So we started planning pretty early. And the way our business works is that my wife, Valerie, and I have been running the company for 20 years, and we bought 7 plots of land here in Los Angeles, and we combined a 1-acre studio, and our home is here, and all of our private parking and our staff and everyone else comes to work here. So we've got a nice facility where all the actors come and celebrities and our clients all come here to work. So we're essentially working from home. So we've been sort of planning for this pandemic for about 20 years.
So basically PCB is just one great big bunker where everyone can work at then.
It is pretty much the zombie bunker that you do want to hang out in, yes, in the apocalypse. And so what we did was we took our engineers and we set them all up remotely. So we set up engineering systems for them to work from home. And then what we did is we partnered with a lot of the major manufacturing corporations that work in the audio industry, so Neumann microphones and Sennheiser headphones and Apogee Electronics for their preamps and Source Elements that does all the remote connections. And we built these PCB remote rigs, and these were high quality rigs that we could ship out to the actors' homes. And instead of furloughing some of our staff, we decided to transition them into helping to maintain and deliver all of these rigs. And we have to sanitize them and sterilize them and deliver them and pick them up from the actors. And so now we just basically transferred our work, so we continue to work from home. Our engineers work from their homes, and all the actors work from their homes. So we really actually have been busier now since the pandemic than before, because there's this whole added layer of maintaining all of this remote connectivity on top of the studio work that we did. Plus, most of our audience and our fans and our friends are all at home anyway playing video games, so there's a greater demand for streaming and for video games and home entertainment. So as sad as it is to see everything that's going on in the world right now, we've been surprisingly really busy and kind of our heads down in the sand, just working like crazy.
So, like, I have to say, you kind of talking about that process of getting everyone, whether it be sort of the equipment they need or like getting everything kind of to and from, it reminds me, I was watching, there was a really, really short clip of South Park just started their new season, and they showed what they had to do to get everyone from their like giant 200-person studio to like, okay, well now we have to ship out like 300 ultra-wide monitors and a whole bunch of computers to people's houses. And the morbid behind-the-scenes person in me just is like, why has no company done a full like behind-the-scenes video documentary about this? Because like that alone is such a Herculean task of like getting these people set up in their houses and what that's really like. Of just like I love learning about that stuff like that, because yes, it has like a million and one different headaches, but it's been so interesting of like I'm sure when you guys started that process and where you are now in October, like you guys have probably learned so much through that process and learned along the way.
Well, and the one thing is that we had just been planning our first fan event, so we were developing this new show called AVOX, which is the Actors Voiceover Expo, and that was set for this summer in Pasadena here in Los Angeles. And the idea was we were going to feature over 100 of the top working actors in anime and video games and all the different shows that are out. And so we had the whole convention center reserved, and we had just started up our marketing campaign, and this was starting to break out, and we just, we already committed, we already had the convention center held. So we decided to put that on hold and postpone until next year, hopefully, knock on some kind of wood. But what we're looking at doing now is we've had such success for transitioning these remote rigs for recording the actors at home that we're now partnering with a few other companies to start doing more of our live events virtually as well. So shipping out these same rigs, but also shipping out camera systems and high bandwidth connections, so that way the fans can directly connect with a lot of the stars and actors from the games we're working on.
So I kind of want to ask your personal opinion on this, just because I have always tried to pride myself on like always sort of knowing what's sort of going on in terms of like frontward facing things from like a fan perspective, but also behind the scenes, because it always kind of helps give that perspective of like, say if like someone's wondering, oh, where's project X, Y, or Z, it can be like, well, here, because especially nowadays, I think it's so easy for people to be like, oh, well, this isn't done or this isn't good because blah, 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 we're in a pandemic or something. For you personally, are you ever surprised at when there are some companies out there who kind of try and hide the fact that people are having to do this stuff at home now? Because for me, I'm just like sort of surprised it's not like you're more welcoming of it, of like, hey, yes, we're doing this from home, but look at how much great work we can still accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, there's a perception that working from home is not as professional, right? It's more of an amateur type of setup if you're recording in your closet as opposed to $1 million recording studio.
I mean, my camera versus yours right now, Jesus.
But I mean, that's the thing is that, right now the technology is fantastic, and we need, our industry thrives on talent. And so we have to go where the talent is. And, as good as you are with a recording studio, or as good as you are directing, or as good as you are at producing something, it doesn't matter if there's no talent to work on those projects. So that's one of the reasons what we wanted to do was to not put a burden on the actors to have to worry about buying these super expensive microphones and buying these really expensive preamps and having to acoustically treat their rooms and having to understand all the different technical sides of things to run their sessions while they're performing. So for us, it was more important to keep the actors focused on being healthy. Number one, they are their own businesses, and if they get sick, their company goes down. And so for them, working out of their home gives them the security and the comfort of being able to perform in a safe environment. And by us providing not only the equipment so they don't have to buy all that, but also we run it remotely, then they're not having to worry about adjusting all the engineering and trying to account for the sound and making sure it sounds okay. So that's really our job. Our job is to direct them, get the best performance, and also get the best fidelity. And so I think a lot of people figured that, oh, well, hey, technology is so great that we can just work at home. And a lot of actors who already were auditioning from home and doing a lot of other types of projects, books on tape or podcasts or other things where they were working at home, were already kind of leaning that direction. So this is actually going to kind of change really, even post-COVID. I think you're going to see a big change in our industry where actors are going to realize that, well, A, they don't have to come into the studio, especially if the studios can provide rigs for them to record at home. And the second thing is it opened up our talent base to be not just limited to Los Angeles. Usually most producers and most directors want to work face-to-face with actors because of the convenience, because of the way the studios are wired, because of the communication that's there. And so the whole pandemic has really kind of forced all of us to reevaluate our technology that we already had, programs like Source Connect and Zoom and these other things. They've been around for a while. It's just no one's used them as heavily as they have now. And so we've all had to kind of been forced to re-engineer our pipelines and really find more efficient ways for us to work. And I think that's going to benefit everybody long term.
So kind of putting a little bit more of the focus back on you. So considering how high up your position is with PCB for it, how much, I guess, do you ever really get to put your hands into a certain project or so? Does it kind of vary? Do you like to try and get your eyes on as many different things as possible? Like, how do you sort of manage everything that goes through the company?
I had started. For me, PCB was just me doing it because I was the composer, I was the engineer, I was the director, and when I first started working on the Call of Duty series, my other client was Jumpstart, and it was all the reading games and all the children's education.
Oh my god! I was like, I know. Why is that making me feel so old? Yeah, I was like, yeah, I forgot I grew up with all those.
Yeah, and so Valerie is Val. She's the main voice of that series, and so
shut up. She's the same voice.
That's Val, right? Oh. And so I was kind of going crazy because during the day, I'm recording all these actors fighting against the Nazis and all these other different types of soldiers, and RPG, and then at night Val's like RPG. And I couldn't handle. I couldn't go back and forth between Call of Duty and Jumpstart. It was just too hard. And so I turned to Val and I said, "Look, you're the host of this. You've been working on this for years. You're an amazing actress." She was already doing all of our booking and administration and coordination. And so she transitioned into directing that series and took over all the Jumpstart stuff. And as that started to progress, then she moved on to doing a lot of stuff with me with a lot of my clients. And now she's taken over most of the stuff on Monster Hunter, all the Catherine games, and the big one that everyone knows her for now is she took over after I finished up Persona 4. She took on Persona 4 Golden, and now she did Persona 5 and going on from there. So the two of us really tag team a lot of the major productions that come through, and we do about 30 plus games a year now, about 30 to 40 games, and each of us we work with about 1,000 actors each a year. So we're doing 2 to 3 sessions a day, and we're in for well over 300 days a year. So it's been great to be able to work with her, and it's also been stressful to find staff that can keep up with the amount of work that we do. And so we've really tried to hire some really great engineers and really great people to help adapt with us. And as a result, the quality is always our number one concern with our performers and our clients and the work that we do. And I think we've really made a name for ourselves just because we won't compromise the quality. And so for me, my time gets spread between my personal passion projects that I'm working on and then all my client work, which is great. And so as Valerie has been taking on more of the projects, that's been freeing me up to get my original games and my original movies produced. And so I've got a new TV show in development right now based on one of my graphic novels. I've got a new game, and I just had my first film that I directed a couple of years ago. So it's been really exciting and fun, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without Valerie supporting me and being able to be a great partner in the company.
Keith, again, I give you an inch and you give me a 4-course meal of things I can now ask you about. Like, you're just going to throw out, well, when I was doing Persona 4 and then Valerie was doing it, I can't even give you the softball ones. Like, well, with all this time with Valerie, how do you even get to be married to her with all this stuff for it? But I guess one of the things I have to ask is, for you, have you ever had that time of you're working on a project and then by the time it finally comes out, it's almost like hard for you to kind of recall it? Because something I always find so interesting when I talk to different like directors or voice actors, they'll be like, so when you worked on like Project X or whatever, like I remember I was talking recently to Aaron Fitzgerald and I was like, hey, so you just did Persona 5 Royal and the animation for it, and she's like, oh yeah, I did both those around the same time. I was like, hey, so like what was the kind of headspace when you went into this character? Like, no idea. It was so long ago. And be like, I can't even put any percent of blame on it because especially when you're doing so many different projects or so many different things, just pull out like, hey, do you remember this one piece of your lunch from 3 years ago? That's basically the equivalent of what I'm asking somebody.
Well, it's really interesting because we now teach a lot of classes in all of our free time that we have, but we sit down and we really work with actors on understanding the business and teaching them sort of a lot of the technical skills and sort of the way to go about approaching their work in the game industry. And the one thing that I really kind of have been starting to express to a lot of actors or people kind of working in the industry is that voice actors in games, this is different than animation and other fields, but in video games, a lot of actors are treated sort of like session musicians for orchestras. So if you think about like the way a movie is scored, you have these unbelievably talented musicians who have years and years of training, who really understand their instrument very, very well. And they come in, they sight read music, and in 1 or 2 takes with an orchestra, they're performing on a major motion picture. And then they get out and they go to the next gig. And that's how they work. And very much so in video games, that's how actors are treated. They're paid a session fee. They come in for 2 to 4 hours. They are cold reading all of their dialogue. Most of the time, we don't get a chance to see the dialogue in advance. So, and very rarely do we get a chance to then hold on to those characters and do something with them. Now, fortunately, with franchises like Call of Duty or with Persona or some of these other games that we've worked on, the audiences have reacted to those games and really embraced those characters, and as a result, the actors have gotten more notoriety and become very attached to their characters, and so I think that's really what's the good part that's been happening with the industry, is that people are now paying attention to the actors and the performers who are behind their favorite characters and now starting to follow them and really interested in other projects that they're doing. That wasn't the case 10 years ago, but now you're seeing people like Yuri Lowenthal or Arem or Troy Baker or all these great actors who now have a following because of the performances they did in their games. And that's really rewarding because we know that, we've been involved in establishing these characters and directing them and casting them on these games. So we feel really great that we were able to be part of those franchises and to kind of mold and shape those performances that the fans love. Yeah,
it's like it's so funny you mentioned like how much different we kind of take our even just fandoms with these different like actors and stuff. Like a great example, look at the recent face change with Spider-Man this year for the PlayStation 4 game. And I remember people being like, "Oh, I like the original more. Oh, I like the new one more." And I'm just felt like one of the only people in the Yuri Lowenthal fan club being like, "I'm sorry, we changed his face and we didn't put Yuri's face on here. We have the technology. This man's got a beautiful face. Let's put it in there. His voice is everywhere. But what can we do with this man's face?"
I know, and that's not only that, but like Prince of Persia, man, it's like he needed to be in that motion picture. Not that the movie was, all that much direct.
I just want to get like a one-on-one room talk with Yuri and Jake Gyllenhaal, just talking it out, being like, "Listen, I'm aware why they picked you, but we just need to really see who's the better physiqued man," and that would be a tough argument.
I won't give it away here, but there was a conversation between the two of them that did go down, and I'll let you save that for Yuri sometime. It's a very good story.
I am so glad by some miracle when this show started, like, because I've been doing this for like almost over 8 years now, I was able to get Yuri Lowenthal on here before he was even more popular than he already was 8 years ago. And it's just so funny because, like, I'll have these moments of like talking to people, and I like will even just say like, "Oh man, I'm so glad I knew you back then, because I would definitely not have your phone number nowadays if it was just like, let me just I'm just gonna do a cold tweet to like Troy Baker, be like, Troy, like, we just gotta schedule in for like a 4:30. What's going on? Can we just get you in here for like 10-15 minutes?"
Well, that's what was interesting was that Yuri and Travis Willingham and Liam O'Brien. And Troy Baker were all, really close friends. I was bringing them on to all of my projects.
We noticed. Us playing, we noticed.
And so I really was interested in branching out and getting a lot of my graphic novels and stories made into movies. And I had a film that was going into production back in 2008 called Frost Road. And Yuri had actually done a lot of the artwork with me. He posed for a lot of the models for the graphic novel. And we had a big devastating fire that wiped out all of our studios here. And so that was right around the time the economy collapsed. And so while we were rebuilding our company and our studios, no one was going to move forward on the motion picture and what we were going to do, especially with a first-time film director. Even though I'd done hundreds and hundreds of video games, no one was going to, bank on us doing that. And I was in the middle of doing Modern Warfare 2, I think, at the time. And so we just spent a lot of time rebuilding the company. And when we came back, I went to Yuri and Troy and Travis and Liam, and I said, "Look, I really want to do a motion picture. The economy's in the toilet. I'm going to raise friends and family money, and we're just going to do a little tiny small student film." And we went out, shot a 20-minute film as a proof of concept, and we got investment right away, and we shot this little film called Phoenix Incident. And what was great was that no one at the time knew what Yuri looked like or what Troy looked like. I mean, they were just starting out. So it made the film more believable because it was like a mockumentary alien abduction kind of Blair Witch film.
Yeah, so this would have been like, what, 08, 09?
No. So I wrote the script, I think, in 2010, 11. We had the fire in 2008, and we recovered for a few years and were in the middle of projects. So 2010 to 12, started working on the script. Got funding by 12, and I think by 14 we shot the movie. So those guys were right in the middle of their careers, starting to really, really take off. And I was getting a little nervous because the whole thing was that, I wanted these great performances, but not anyone that was recognizable. Because the moment you put, a Jake Gyllenhaal in a movie, it's like, okay, this is a motion picture. But we really wanted it to be like this Blair Witch sort of, faux documentary. And of course, by the time the film came out, Yuri and Troy and Travis and Liam, everyone's careers have just exploded now, and Critical Role is everywhere. And Yuri got all of his roles, and Last of Us took off for Troy. And we'd already done so many projects together, but it was really interesting to see that all kind of come out. And that film is actually pretty funny because it's got probably about 20 top voice actors all in there doing cameos and voiceovers and other things.
Yeah, like if you went off their status nowadays, the theoretical box cover for it would just be like half names, and the title would just be smudged down in the corner.
Right, exactly.
That's really funny, especially just how crazy everyone's meteoric rise has been just from that like list of names you brought up for it. And It's funny you mentioned like you wanted to kind of pick not like no name actors but just like not super like wide recognizable people like that. And I was just talking to a friend of mine about I'm in the camp of thinking like stuff like Death Stranding, while that primarily has a lot of very well known Hollywood type actors, doesn't really take it away from me. We were joking about it of this goes to show that game's casting where I look at Troy Baker and I'm like, what blackmail does he have on Hideo Kojima that he got in that cast? Because like he is so like the voice actor like pulled out of there. Because like yes, Troy's done like tons of like actual acting roles for it, but it's like we got Mads Mikkelsen, we got Guillermo del Toro, we got Norman Reedus. Oh, and that guy who the guy who did Kanji like 12 years ago. And it's just like so funny to be like, yeah, because Troy's done so many things for it, but it's like you gotta like wonder like what cigarette break did he take with Kojima that got him in like that in Metal Gear Solid 5? I'm like, what happened there? Because clearly it wasn't like Kojima wasn't just listening to American game voice acting and go like, this guy's got it. We got to get this guy in a couple more of my games.
Right.
I guess sort of going a little bit more personal again, but just because you've mentioned so many different things you've worked on, at least in terms of like directing or just even kind of like having your hands in it a little bit from the PCB perspective, do you have like if you had a like Schindler's List moment, like gun to your head, what is like a project that just like really personally like either means a lot to you or you're just like an actual honest to goodness fan of, and why?
Wow. It's interesting that for different reasons I love different projects. A few of those games I was mentioning earlier, one of the first games I ever directed was Toonstruck, and I'd been in the music industry, I was engineering, and we had all these giant celebrities coming in for this game we were working on at Virgin, and it's this animated project, and we had Christopher Lloyd and Dom DeLuise and Dan Castellaneta and all the Disney guys and all the Warner Brothers guys, and so in comes Tim Curry as our first actor. And I'm the engineer and I'm the audio director now, so I'm supposed to be engineering all this stuff. But the writer comes in, the producer comes in, the vice president comes in, Tim Curry's on his way, and I look around to the team and I said, well, who's directing the actor? And they looked around the room and they said, well, you're the audio guy. And so the first actor I ever directed was Tim Curry, and so I was like, trial by fire, which was, and you're not going to direct Tim Curry. He's just amazing. He doesn't need any real direction. But you really realize that a director's job is more guiding the choices and keeping the project together than it is invoking your particular vision of what the project is, because games are very collaborative, and between the art and the design and the programming and all the different elements that are there, you have this hive mind of creatives all coming together. So as a director in the game space, even though I creatively direct and I am creating a lot of original projects, most of the time I see my position as contributing to the performances and the audio. Obviously, sound and music is a big part of it as well, but really designing the choices and keeping all the actors in the same direction, the choices, and sort of making sure that the performances are consistent. So games like that were really special because I really got to experiment and learn about directing. That other game I mentioned, Metal Arms, was a lot of fun because I brought some of the cast back from Toonstruck. I brought Dan Castellaneta and a couple other people back in. And it was fun because I got to write it, got to do all the music, do all the sound, direct all the actors. And even though the sales weren't as big as what we've seen on Call of Duty and some of these other big franchises I've worked on, those games were really special just because I think the performances were so special. There was a creative spark on those projects that really was very endearing to the audience and to the production team. And you see things like, the Persona games have definitely been there. Modern Warfare 2 was really special just because we had really kind of hit our stride when we were working on a lot of those games. So when you have a lot of these teams that get to work together over and over and over again, you start seeing really special things happen because they're past the newness of just trying to figure out these really crazy technical pipelines, and they get to really focus on the creative. And that's why I think you see sequels in the game industry always do well, and you see a lot of these teams that have been around for a long time start to do really special things because they're pushing the envelope for what they know what to do, and so that's what's been really great, and working with teams at Sega and Atlas and Capcom and a lot of these new companies that we're going to be announcing later this year. It's a lot of fun because we can take all of our experience of what we've done with a lot of actors that we've got to work with for years and start to really push the envelope and do something, regardless of all the things that are going on in the world. We get to creatively really get to do some fun stuff.
So I got like two questions for you because I know I got to let you go pretty soon, but just because you're in a really interesting perspective of like how you're mentioning you worked with the original Persona 4 and Val did Golden. In situations like that where a couple of major roles kind of have to get changed, is it ever like weird, since you worked on the first project, seeing like these characters, like with Aaron getting replaced, with Aaron replacing, I always forget the original person's name, or later on I remember with Matt then coming in to replace Troy a couple years later, is like stuff like that sort of like, do you ever have like input on that end, even if you're not really working on the project, when it's like, oh, like this person might not kind of fit, or like, is it weird seeing those choices made in general, let alone if they actually involve you or not?
Yeah, I mean, we're usually involved to some extent just because we're obviously the ones directing them and casting and doing all the stuff that's there. One of the big focuses we've been trying to do is really help grow the acting community and make better working conditions for the actors and making sure the actors are educated in terms of understanding why they're doing what they're doing. So you have a lot of older games that were either coming in from other countries like Japan, or we've had projects from Russia and Poland and Korea, and a lot of those countries have never dealt with unions before, and so that was a real kind of a growing and learning experience for our industry, because we have a lot of actors who are super, super talented, who want to work and come from a really dynamic background. And these game companies are starting to come in and working with us to create these games. And the unions at the time weren't really accustomed to the story structures of how stories evolve. If you look at like a Western style story structure versus something in Asia, it's very different. Mm-hmm. The way the cast comes together, the way they work together, and the way the scripts are written. And so as a result, the union laws were very restrictive in the past, that really wouldn't allow for games that were being developed, say like in Japan, to be union without being more expensive than our big US games. So a game like Persona would have been infinitely more expensive to do than Call of Duty, just because of the number of cast and the number of lines per actor. And as an example, it's way more expensive if you have one actor doing 1,000 lines versus 1,000 actors each doing one line. And so if someone just says, oh yeah, the script is about 1,000 lines, well, if you have 1,000 actors, it's going to be a much different cost than one actor. And so that's what happens, is that in a lot of these titles that we started to work on, we realized that the story structure and the casting was so drastically different. And we were bringing in a lot of these amazing actors who were coming in from Texas. That's why we worked with Laura and Troy and all these other actors, Travis, who were coming from Funimation and working on a lot of anime there. Plus, we had this amazing talent base here in Los Angeles. You had Steve Bloom and Mary Elizabeth and all the actors who had been working in anime and animation here. So we had this unbelievable talent pool and these very restrictive contracts. And so what we've been doing over the past 10, 15 years is working with the unions, working with the actors, and coming up with equitable sort of answers that we can then go back to these companies and educate them as to why the actors need certain things and be able to pay them properly and how things work in the United States. And fortunately, especially in the past, like probably about 3 years or so, you've seen this big shift in games where all these games are going union. You're seeing the actors being credited on their games. And a lot of the reasons you see a lot of actors moving around on these older titles was mainly because as the actors became more popular or more well-known, you were having to cast different actors based on their union status or where the union projects were. And unfortunately, the fans were like, well, they were trying to say, well, this actor was this, and why aren't they being credited, and trying to do things. And that was actually to protect the actors, just so, if the actors were working on a project that was outside of the unions or something to that effect. Mm-hmm. And so what you've seen now is this real change in the unions, change in the actors, change in the industry. And as a result, all these games are now going union. There's this great new interactive localization agreement that SAG has worked on, and it still needs some work, but it's amazing how much that has really benefited a lot of our projects. And as a result, the actors are now able to earn pension and health. Their taxes are being attributed. They can get credit on the games properly. And as a result, I think you're starting to see a big growth in our industry, and that'll really pay off in the next year or two. You're going to see a lot of new games where a lot of this talent is just going to be really flourishing. And so I think a lot of fans were really confused why they saw actors moving around on projects, and they weren't even credited for the most part. But that was really, a lot of it was just because they weren't really able to fit into the contracts that were allowing them to work.
Okay. The last one should be a much less of a mouthful of questions for you. So hopefully this does not put you in that weird of a spot, but I've always been kind of curious. So for fans, when projects get announced, usually it's almost first in Japan. We're kind of getting closer to more companies making simultaneous announcements. But
Right.
from your company's perspective, is it ever like really heartbreaking when a game from Japan that is very, very like highly anticipated ends up making its way over here, but just completely ends up skipping the English voice acting when it's like, oh, this would have been so perfect for it? Like the edge case example I always go to is Persona Q2, where that first game, I remember everybody had so much fun working on not only that localization, but all the voice actors loved coming together, and all the fans, like, that's such like a celebration of like those characters. And when that got brought over to America last year, it was just like, yep, everyone hated the decision that this was only in Japanese, because it's like, on paper, like if you're crunching numbers, it makes sense. Just take
Right.
the game, this is a super late system, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, you can't just say, hey, here's this Spider-Man club. It's like, imagine if Enter the Spider-Verse was a bunch of Hungarian actors. I'm sure they killed it, but, like, I'm attracted to these characters, and, like, because I know that actor as this person. It's just not put insert blank voice here. So, like, for you guys, when projects like that, especially something like a sequel to something you already worked on, like, does there ever have moments of just like, hey, what can we do to make this happen, or does it never usually really even get that far?
Well, that's why it's really important for the fans to really come out and support the talent, because it used to be, as I was mentioning earlier, that a lot of times the game companies were like, well, does anyone really care, about the actors? It's all about the gameplay. It's all about, what the game is. And the actors were always seen as very dispensable or not as imperative to the game sales. That has really, really changed in the past several years, and now there's a much bigger focus on performance, and our industry is really, really taking off. So I think you're starting to see a lot of games come back around and either be revoiced, which they weren't in the past, or get updated versions of those. And so there's been a number of remakes and other re-releases and remastered versions where you're seeing a chance to take an older game where maybe the graphics were older or the platform isn't, updated or compatible with nowadays, but the game was fantastic, and add these performances. So I think that's starting to happen a lot, and that's really encouraging, which is, I think, really, really great. And at the same time, you're seeing, this, I don't know, like we just did the new Yakuza game that's about to come out this year, and some people, really shocked that there was an English version of it.
By the way, can I just say, so weird. Like, when the option for the original is still there, and, like, people are just like, I can't believe they've sullied the name of this series by giving it more, like, voiceover options. It's like, no one's took away the original Japanese one. Like, if you were this offended by George Takei being in a video game, I guess that's the biggest problem you had this year. But, like, yeah, like, the complainers on that are definitely more in the vocal minority. Like, I know most of the fandom is just happy that, like, that's even possible.
Well, I think the original Yakuza wasn't as well received, and I think that probably echoed back to Japan and other people saying, well, hey, maybe this thing shouldn't be voiced. And so when the team came to me, we were working on Persona and a few other games, and they had seen a game called Sleeping Dogs, and they were working on an offshoot of the Yakuza series called Judgment. Judgment Eyes, as was in Japan, and they wanted to have this serious crime drama, very realistic performances, and with their amazing animation and storytelling that they were doing. And they had seen Sleeping Dogs, and they wanted to experiment and say, well, if the game was done like Sleeping Dogs, we'd consider doing it in English. And Sega is like, well, Keith is the one who directed Sleeping Dogs. I think we could talk to him about it. And so I looked at the project, fell in love with it, and same thing happened. People were really like offended that there was going to be a dubbed version, and everyone said, we're just going to listen to the Japanese version. But it was amazing. I went to Japan about a year and a half ago, met with the team there, and the director, pulled me aside and he said, I prefer listening to the game in English now. And I thought that was amazing. And as a result, we used that opportunity to change some of the technology and our process of how we were going to tackle Yakuza. And with Yakuza, we were able to, same localization team with Sega here in the US. Scott and Dan and the whole team here were just amazing. And I think we really did something very, very special with Yakuza, and being a little unfamiliar with the series before that, I'd known about it, but I hadn't really gotten into how crazy it really is.
Yeah, because depending on what you're looking at it, you could be like, oh, this is a very gritty, serious, like kind of drama, totally. And then looking at other things, being like, oh, that's why there's a lot of adult men and diaper babies. Okay, all right.
Yeah. And there are things, I have to say, there are things in that game that you cannot unsee. You see it and you're like, I can't believe I just saw that, and I can't get that image out of my mind. And while we were working on it, because a lot of times the team themselves hasn't even seen everything because it's coming in from Japan while it's in development. So suddenly, we work with a scene with, grown men in diapers and other things, and you're like, oh, okay, that's what we're doing today. And, you got to love your job. I mean, this is just one of the best industries to work in. And the actors had a blast. And that's why we really feel that it's a big family behind the scenes. The actors and the clients and all the projects that we work on. Everyone really, really enjoys spending their time together because we work on so many projects. It may feel like a very big industry, but it's actually very small behind the scenes. And so it's great, and I think that now you're seeing better conditions for the actors. That's paying off in much better performances. Audience is paying attention now and supporting the games, and I'm really appreciative of it because now when Yakuza does come out and people do see these other games that we've really worked so hard to localize and make them appropriate for other territories and other cultures. I think the audiences will really like and love that work that we've put into it. So yeah, it's a good time.
Two of your guys' upcoming projects, I'm very curious to see what people think are. Yeah, definitely Yakuza 7, just because. Judgment gives you that kind of test bed of like what that's like from the same developer, and obviously you guys worked on both titles. But the one that I'm really curious about, and obviously is still quite a ways away, at least in terms of it actually coming out now, is Nocturne Remastered. Just because that's going to be one of those fun titles of like, this is a game, like you mentioned, of like this game originally didn't have voice acting when it came out like 15 plus years ago. So seeing these characters now having voices, even though the game is over a decade old, now having voice acting for the first time. So it'll be interesting, like seeing. Just like after the one teaser trailer that's come out in English, it's been so funny of people being like, oh my god, is this person this one or this one? Just like all these little fun questions of like what on paper is basically just going to be like, hey, here's a PS2 game played on your Switch or PS4. Just the English voice acting and alone like has sparked so many different conversations on like our community's end.
And we had seen that a few times. I mean, we did one of the remasters for Silent Hill, and we had done some other things for Persona.
I wasn't gonna bring that up. That Silent Hill one. It depends on who you ask for on that one, but.
Well, they mixed things. The problem is that some of it was great and some of it was kind of mixed, and so it's like you never know. Like that, a lot of the times, you'll get stuff where you'll. Put stuff out where you think it's solid, and then you see how it gets implemented or how it's put together or the context has changed, and you just kind of shrug and you're like, oh, well, if we had known that, it would have changed the performances. But it's interesting. It's definitely, an industry that And like I said before, it's sort of like you're a session player. You come in and you really don't know what you're working on until you get there. And every day, that's what makes our jobs exciting, because you're going from so many different franchises each day. And once you know your work, now you're just playing with friends and coming up with new characters and new performances and telling stories.
So I know I said that was my last question, but you actually reminded me of something. If I could ask you really quick, just because I'll kick myself in the ass if I don't ask you this.
Yeah.
You mentioned because there is that big disconnect of like you guys are paid to do your job, and it's not like you guys aren't the ones doing everything in terms of the localization side. There are so many different parties involved with all these different projects. Just getting like English voice acting isn't like it's far from like the first and last step there. But I'm curious, is it ever kind of frustrating when you guys work on a project? You guys are like, okay, we nailed this project, but like things that are totally out of your hands might make the project kind of sullied, like similar to the Silent Hill thing of like what I'm more specifically referring to is the Persona 5 the animation thing that just came out. And I remember so many people were so surprised when that got announced for so many reasons, and it was one of those funny things of I remember when I reviewed it, it was those things of I loved that this came out in English. I loved the fact that like this wasn't just stuck to like so many of the other Persona 3 movies or whatever, and that I had a chance for the voice actors. Like you guys all clearly sounded like you had so much fun working on it, and it was so cool to see the cast there. But it was also that same thing of like, also I'm very realistic. Like as an adaptation, it has a lot of faults, and this is like a $300 product if you want to own it. So it's like it sucks so much as like let alone a reviewer, let alone as a fan to be like, the work you guys did at PCB was so good, but it's like it was also one of those things of I also can't just blanketly say, hey everybody, buy this show for like $300. So it's like, is there ever like that hard moment of like, because I remember when the show got announced, it was like, oh cool, because no matter how you felt about the anime, it's like, oh that's great that the voice acting, like there's an English version of it, and then I remember that price tag just hit so many people in a spot of like, man, it sucks that like yes people have to get paid for the work for it, but then at the same time of like, I think the conversation then became, instead of, oh, let's judge this English version, and was more, let's talk about the price instead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big thing is that, obviously on the talent, the creative side, you're so far removed from the business side of how that ends up being with the audience, how it's marketed, how it's distributed, what its main intention is, if it is something that's going to be on DVD or Blu-ray, or it's going to be a broadcast show or on a streamed channel. A lot of times you don't know. And for a lot of times, especially in animation, you're just assuming that something is going to be just, free on Netflix, or it's going to be on Hulu or whatever that's going to be. So if there's a price tag or something that's associated with it, very rarely does that really reflect on the talent or the people who are working on the production itself. But unfortunately, that does affect the sales and the success of that, because people will focus on things like that. The big thing for us is that, the series, obviously for good or for bad, it was a great way to consolidate the series for people who weren't familiar with the game or had played through everything that was there. But the biggest thing for us is we saw it as a good chance to be a big cast reunion and get everyone back together. And one of the big things that we did on the technology side is we did that entire series without dubbing it. Everyone is used to dubs, and where they're in the studio hearing ADR beeps and they're on their headphones and dubbing. And we did the entire 32 episodes without dubbing a single line of dialogue. And it was a new process that we were kind of experimenting with. We wanted to do something where we could retain the original performances, have a lot of fun in the studio, and do it really efficiently. And something that should have taken us about 6 to 8 months, we did in about 6 to 8 weeks. And so it was great because the quality came out super great. We had a really fun time doing it. And it's disappointing to see that the cost of the series was something that was reflecting poorly on some of the reviews. But the nice thing was that the audience really did like those characters getting back together again, and I think so for us, that's the long term of it is that we're hoping the audience does get to see all the work that we did and enjoy those performances.
That's really interesting. You mentioned how it wasn't dubbed. That actually kind of explains some of the things with it, because I remember one of the oddities when people were starting the show is there's actually like a couple of different weird little audio errors, specifically for like one character with Kamoshida in the very beginning of the show, and his like mix is kind of different for the first like 2 or 3 episodes, and it's one of those things of like, for you guys, especially when we're in such like a streaming culture of like, you can stream it on like Funimation and different things, like obviously the Blu-rays are kind of in that thing. Is there ever a moment like that where when a show is out and there's an error that's pretty noticeably picked up by fans and stuff online, do you ever get the chance to be like, okay, hey, let's like correct this for streaming services and stuff like that?
We'd love to do that. A lot of times we're not aware of them. There's sometimes what we've seen a number of our shows sometimes get pushed out of sync, where things get slid around or other things are moved. So sometimes we're not aware of it, and then it'll air, and then we'll obviously fix it if there's a later release that's there. But for the most part, we're not aware of it until it's too late, and then it goes out. So that's unfortunate, because sometimes there's other people that touch it along the way, and we've definitely seen that. And especially when it comes to something as specific as doing something in sync, we always quality check everything in the studio, but then when it changes post that, it can reflect poorly on us even if we didn't get to do that. So we always hope for that chance, but that's not always the case.
Okay. Well, Keith, thank you so much for letting me ask the very not fun, mean questions at the end of the show. And more importantly, thank you so much for coming on and talking with me and letting me steal way too much of your time.
No, it's always good. Always good. Well, thanks for taking the time to be interested in the projects that we do. It's we love this business, and the things we've got coming up are we're very, very proud of. So it's nice to be able to have a chance to connect with the audience and give them a little insight as to what's coming up.
Yeah. Is there anything like basically social wise you'd like people to find you or PCB? Like where's the best place for people to follow you or the company?
For our website is pcbproductions.com, and we're on most of the social media platforms. I'm at Keith Arem on Twitter and on Instagram, and Valerie is at Valerie Arem. And we are PCB Productions and PCB Entertainment on all handles as well. So we definitely love hearing from the fans, and we're pretty busy, but we do try to respond as much as we can. Yeah, and then we're going to be much more active this next year. We'll hopefully be re-announcing AVOX for the fans, and that'll give chance for people to come out and meet the actors and meet us and see a little bit more behind the scenes, especially after this whole pandemic passes.
Yeah, hopefully if the world does not continue to be a dumpster fire next year. I remember when you guys when you were talking about it, like, well, because you guys are in such a great like location for everyone to kind of meet up and like basically rent out a place, like, so like that would be something really, really special to go to if you guys can make it happen.
Yeah, there hasn't been really any expo that focuses solely on the talent. There's other expos that
it's like, do you want to go to this place? I hope you like anime or video games, because like very rarely it's like, no, I'm just here for the person. I'm good whatever project they're in. I just want to meet that person.
Right, exactly.
Like I'm the weirdo who at conventions will wait in autograph lines just to say hi to someone. I don't want them to sign anything. It'd just be like, no, I just wanted to meet you.
Well, and I think actually that is becoming a thing, and that's why we created this, because we really wanted that opportunity for fans to come out and say, hey, talent matters, and we want to spend a day hearing about these projects and hearing about what happened on this game, or meeting that actor and doing a workshop with them. So yeah, AVOX is going to be a lot of fun, and so if all this passes next summer, will be a really fun time for people to come out and meet everybody.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for coming on, and thank you everybody for listening. Have a good one, and we'll see you next week.